There's something unusual about Generation X. Boomers are talked about constantly. Millennials are analyzed in endless articles. Gen Z gets studied like a brand new social experiment. But right in the middle of all that attention sits a generation that people rarely examine closely. Generation X. Born roughly between the mid-1960s and early 1980s. You probably know them. They're often the quiet problem solvers in the office, the parent who rarely complains, the coworker who fixes something broken without announcing it to the whole team. They helped build much of the digital world we live in today. Yet they're often the least interested in broadcasting their lives online, and psychologically, they may be one of the most interesting generations alive. To understand why, you have to start with a scene that shaped millions of them. Imagine a weekday afternoon in the late 1970s. School has just ended. Children scatter in every direction. Some run toward waiting parents, others climb into cars, but one child walks home alone. There's a key in their pocket. They unlock the door and step into a quiet house. No parents, no phones, no way for anyone to check if they arrived safely. Just a few hours before evening. This was a common routine. Millions of children experienced it. They became known as latchkey kids, and those quiet afternoons created an early psychological lesson. When something happens, you figure it out. Children raised in that environment learned something subtle. Actions had consequences, and those consequences appeared quickly. If homework wasn't finished, the problem didn't disappear. If something broke, someone eventually noticed. Over time, the brain begins to adapt to that environment. You start thinking ahead. What happens if I do this? What happens if I don't? Many psychologists believe that environments like this encourage a strong ability to anticipate outcomes. And that habit of thinking several steps ahead still appears in many Gen X adults today. But something else was happening at the same time, something that shaped their worldview even more deeply. Generation X grew up hearing a familiar promise: work hard, stay loyal, everything will work out. But while those words were being repeated, the world around them was shifting. Divorce rates were rising. Companies were laying people off. Entire industries were changing. Children notice these patterns, even when adults don't explain them. They see the gap between what people say and what actually happens. And over time, that observation creates a particular mindset: hope for the best, but always prepare for change. Not quite pessimism, more like quiet realism. If you listen to Gen X conversations, you may notice something interesting. There is often a layer of humor, dry humor, sometimes sarcastic, occasionally a little dark. This style developed partly as a coping strategy. During their childhood years, global tensions were often discussed openly. The Cold War was a constant background presence. Schools practiced emergency drills. Adults tried to stay calm while talking about frightening possibilities. Humor helped create a buffer, a way to acknowledge uncertainty without being overwhelmed by it. But this emotional style created an interesting paradox. Generation X is often described as highly independent. They solve problems alone. They rarely ask for help. But here's the strange part. Despite that independence, they are also deeply loyal to the small groups they trust: friends, coworkers, family. They may not openly depend on people, but when someone they care about needs help, they usually show up immediately, quietly, without turning it into a performance. It seems contradictory, until you remember how many of them grew up. Children who manage themselves early also learn to rely heavily on a small circle of trusted people. Independence and loyalty develop together, not separately. Another trait often associated with Generation X is their relationship with privacy. They grew up in a world where mistakes disappeared quickly. Embarrassing moments happened. People laughed, and then everyone moved on. There were no permanent digital records, no viral videos, no online archives storing every awkward decision. Because of that, privacy became the default setting for everyday life. For many Gen X adults, sharing every detail online simply feels unnecessary. Not because they reject technology, but because they formed their identity long before the internet started documenting everything. Many Gen X teenagers also entered the workforce early. Paper routes before sunrise, jobs in grocery stores, fast food counters. These experiences introduced real responsibility at a young age. Deliver newspapers late and customers complain. Miscount money and the register shows it. The feedback was immediate. Those experiences reinforced a powerful idea. Competence matters, not just effort, results. And that mindset still shapes how many Gen X adults approach work today. These experiences also influenced how Generation X tends to view authority. They don't automatically reject leadership, but they rarely accept it without evaluation. Skill earns respect. Titles alone do not. Growing up during political scandals and institutional failures left a lasting impression. Authority figures could make mistakes. Large systems could break down. So Gen X developed a simple filter. If someone proves their competence, trust follows. If they don't, skepticism appears quickly. Today, Generation X sits in an unusual position. They remember a world before the internet, but they also helped build the digital systems we rely on. They experienced both stability and disruption, both independence and uncertainty. In many ways, they became a bridge between two different eras. And bridges rarely draw attention to themselves. They simply connect things, quietly supporting everything that moves across them. There is one final detail that often goes unnoticed. Generation X experienced something that is increasingly rare today: boredom, long stretches of time with nothing scheduled, no phone, no constant entertainment, just time to observe the world around them. Boredom encourages curiosity. It trains the brain to notice patterns, to watch people, to understand social dynamics. And that observational skill still appears in many Gen X adults. They watch carefully, they analyze quietly, then they act when it matters. Generation X rarely advertises its strengths. They don't often talk about resilience. They don't turn every challenge into a public story. Instead, they simply continue moving forward, solving problems, helping the people around them, doing the work that needs to be done, because many of them learned a lesson very early. When you walk into an empty house after school and no one is there to guide you, eventually you learn how to guide yourself. And that habit tends to last a lifetime.